Okay, no. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Where are we recording from, just so that I know?
We're just doing a Zoom.
Okay.
It's coming right off of that little globe.
All right.
And then you get picked up by the big mic over there.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, I will call the February 22nd, 2021 Goals Committee of the District Board of Education meeting to order. It's 4:03, and in attendance today is myself, Anna Brandt, Dave Betcher, and via Zoom, Brian Hafer. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Saying something that I have not run a committee meeting other than the diversity committee meeting in almost a year, so I almost forgot that we needed to do that at these meetings. So thanks for doing that quickly. We did have one public comment that came in via email. I don't know if I don't believe we're going to read those, but they're going to be put in the minutes, so anybody who watches this after the meeting can obtain the public comments that were put there at that time. So moving on to public comments, I don't think we have any public in the person. We have people in public, but no one making comments in person. So move on to agenda item 5 for discuss and set priorities for the 2021-2022 school year. You'll see in board book there are a list of priorities set by the budget committee and approved by the board at the February meeting. This is a document that serves as a springboard to priorities in other areas, which is fairly general, and I appreciate the wording it that way, Randy, because that lets us kind of talk about virtually anything. Because as anyone knows, I'm a stickler on sticking to the agenda. So, Dave, where would you like to start with this overall?
I think we could take we got the email from Mark bringing up the 2 items that he wanted to make sure were in the goals for next year.
What were those? I didn't receive this.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't really, if I had noticed that, I would have forwarded it to you.
It's secret non-superintendent email chain we have. Here you go. All right, Mark had said that primary focus of Monday's meeting, I believe, is on establishing goals for the next year. 2 points of focus I'd like to see included on the goals would include equity/social justice and inclusion, and 2, student achievement. And he kind of took it to say that equity, social justice, and inclusion kind of drives all of them, because that also goes along with student achievement under that too. So is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes.
And then generally with student achievement, he wrote, the goal could be to use student achievement as a lens to help guide our decisions regarding program development, budgeting, board initiatives, and board discussions. It could encourage more periodic reporting at BOE on student achievement, because obviously we've gotten lots of questions about that this year. It would be good to get reporting on that more often, because I'll say that PowerPoint that Tim gave at the last full board meeting, looking at like the levels of when kids are getting Fs at the various levels throughout the year. I'd never seen that for previous years before. It was new to see it, probably because I changed now. So that's the kind of thing I think Mark's referring to out there with student achievement. And I know people have said, well, those are Fs, so what about Ds? That's another question too. So I think that's the gist of what Mark was getting at.
He did send, oh, are you talking about his second email?
I didn't see
Did
a
you get the
second email.
one?
That was 2 hours ago, so I didn't see it.
Yep. His second email, he goes into a little more detail on what he thought EDI. Is it EDI or DEI?
DEI,
DEI is the normal, right?
diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that what
Right.
you're talking about? That's the way the name of the committee was put out. So when I don't need to type out that whole thing, I put DEI.
Okay, I just want to make sure we start getting consistent in how we. He was talking about how to advance it by creating an equity statement, as was mentioned at the Dane County Consortium on Equity. They were saying that schools should have some sort of an equity statement written for that. I didn't understand if they meant offering it as just a vision type statement, or did they mean more of a policy type statement? I think it was more vision
I
oriented.
think you've seen it both. The event that he was at was the Dane County Equity Consortium School Board Training, and they were either both. But some people had them as the actual policy, where it was some of them had them also just as statements, almost like a resolution type thing before. So they kind of fell under both categories depending on how a district chose to do it.
Now, we did a statement when we created the committee, right?
A statement later that was like support of the work it's doing.
Okay, so we should probably do something more. We should probably take a look at that and then figure out how to put it in more permanent wording rather than just referring to the committee. Personally, I like them better when they're a policy statement, because then it gives more direction as to what it is supposed to do. It helps, I feel it helps the interpretation better rather than as a vision type statement. How do you feel with better, Randy?
Either way, it's fine. I think that if there's actually places where it can have its own standalone statement in policy, it can also be part of a policy that we have on non-discrimination. I think that's where we kind of rework something. What Mike we went through and did some of our policy work earlier on, there was some reviews of that. The only piece when it's in policy, it does require a few more steps to ever modify it. So it does absolutely keep it more prominent as opposed to a statement that is, in essence, kind of an added 2 minutes, but doesn't really have a prominent place other than probably a place on our website where we would put like.
He did mention, oh, I'm sorry, were you saying something, Brian?
Nope.
He did, in his second email, go on to express that the DEI would be part of reviewing the various programs at the school district. And will be included as whatever, when we do program reviews, do we have a set of criteria that we added or looked at to make sure?
I think that's part of what he's probably talking about. That's
Is it adding it to that?
And there's always been some things like that, but it's probably a different lens to look at things under kind of the current view of equity.
And you mentioned that on the student achievement part, is that should also be part of programming somehow. But that was his 2 main items for editing.
If I can add something like, when you kind of look at the budget priorities that were put forth, you do have some intersection between some of these and some of the other pieces we're talking about. So for example, there's programmatic changes that can come out of like budget requests. So if there's like a recommendation that comes out of a committee, i.e. like the diversity, equity, inclusion committee, that could be considered as part of that. So it does find a space there, but definitely if there's a desire to create kind of a specific kind of equity goal, I mean, that's definitely a piece that we can add in there. I don't want to lose this kind of more of a process piece than an actual kind of measurable item, other than you measure the progress of completing it. We do need to complete a policy review. So that's the piece I don't want to lose. We started that and during COVID we put a halt to it. But when you kind of look at where we're at as a district, sitting here, wanting to plan next year, and our primary objective is getting back to school and then assessing where kids are and making sure we have for kids as they can make that progress. So to me, if you're looking at the big rocks and tentacles in there that definitely have equity and have other pieces tied to them, but it's the return to school and focusing on the kids to make sure that if there were students that are struggling in either an academic realm or social emotional realm, that we have ways that we can help address or making that a priority to be tracking and bring back to the board and then see how we can respond to that.
During our board retreat, when we got to item 4, which was the 2021 goals, and the idea of taking the goals to the goals committee, there were 7 items that various board members brought up. First was COVID, about how to handle summer and getting back to normal and what policies have to be rolled back once we come out of COVID mode, shall we call it?
Yeah.
But I don't see that really as a goal. That's more a process. Second was the budget, about looking at the referendum funds for the next 4 years, how should they be prioritized, and looking at the state budget. Third was growth in facilities, that should be a goal. Fourth was communication and engagement, a more formal plan for how we're going to regularly engage with parents in the community. And actually, that's kind of a comment that the email person put in, which was surprising when I saw that. So a more formal plan on how the board's communications should work. And part of that was also the branding and the logo issue as a subset. 5 was the policy review, which you've already mentioned. 6th was student needs, both emotional, diversity, and academic, as we come out of that. So we brought that one up already. And the last one was staff needs, about teacher compensation and creating a more universal compensation system for across all categories. Those are the ones that were mentioned at the retreat.
So if you kind of look at parallel to the budget priorities, adding something in more specifically to policy, something more specific to the equity. I call it kind of the return to school, the kind of COVID response piece that you were mentioning, Dave. That's the academic and the social emotional learning piece. And then the communication and engagement plan, we talked about the branding piece within the budget goals, but I think that one of the things that Annie has on her goals to do is a communication and engagement plan for the district. We weren't so deep in a lot of the other stuff. That's kind of taken the time, but that would have been her first ask this year. So once she gets asked to do that, that's where her efforts go. So to me, those are kind of the pieces that we could layer in here, in addition to what we've already articulated through the budget priority.
So the thing about a more universal compensation system, you put that under budget?
Yep, that's already there.
Okay.
Yep. That's actually comes right out of our strategic plan. I'm looking at compensation. Budget committee's already asked, and the HR committee have asked for some data from Brian with regards to kind of where our staff fall within compensation comparables. The piece you added in there about like facility planning, that's already there. The branding process is there. To support some of the things that we've already talked about, these are the budget requests that I've asked for there. And I had asked for them over kind of a 5-year vision. So these aren't all like 1 year, but they're definitely pieces that in there that kind of support some of these things. We'll have to be thinking about how we want to allocate funds for that, because going through what we're anticipating in this next budget cycle, fiscally, it's going to be extremely tight. Obviously, there's things referendum-wise we still have flexibility with, but needing to be cautious with ongoing operational expenses given the sunset of the referendum in 5 years. So those are just things to kind of keep in mind. Doesn't mean you can't use them for seed money to get things started. You just have to recapture them at some point before those dollars sunset. But Brian, do you have thoughts? And something to forget you back here.
No, I mean, you pretty much covered everything I've had written on my paper. Let's see. I had put down a little bit of the academic platforms that we'll be looking at, whether it's an online program, a hybrid program. I think that falls into student success and student reach in terms of our community. Yeah, everything else I had written down has already been, you guys discussed.
With the committee, kind of one goal, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to put them together. You kind of have a bunch of sense. Serve as a guide to the goals, typically add these into it also as additional district goals that all gives in one piece. And then we can articulate some of the pieces that we just talked about, the big headers being return to school, being the academic SCL, supporting of remote students as they come out of that, which we've already talked about, the policy and the equity, and then the communication. We could just add that piece onto here, and I could bring that to the next board. The board, if there's other things, I'm happy to add them, but I'm happy to take this and then take the concepts you're talking about, put them into more formal language to present to the board.
Growth in facilities, I think, should be its own item. Only because it's not directly a budget issue. Obviously, it impacts your budget, but I don't think we should look at that through the lens of only cost. Right? And I think that one is, at least looking at the subdivision going now, that's a permanent, almost a permanent item.
It is.
So when you're looking at major items, you have the budget, and then you have growth and facility, the policy review, and communications, and student achievement.
And the return to school, which I think is I think that's the best way to look at the academic SEL and learning platforms moving forward.
So we're kind of looking at 5 major headings, which might be, I think that may be more than we usually have.
Probably more than we've had, but it's, as I told staff, as we looked at some of our initiatives, they all tie together. There's not very few of these that are just standalone, and some of them need to be there. The facilities planning, as you mentioned, Dave, is going to be a continual one, particularly as we move forward.
You know, one bad thing about the goals I've seen in my couple of years on the board is how we'll write them, but then the follow-up only comes when you start reviewing the goals, in the sense that administration's working on them for the year, but as the board, since they're supposed to be our goals, we seem to rarely talk about them until we get to the next goal setting meeting. I'm wondering about the concept, since there's been a lot of talk about using the committees more, and as a way to not only cut down the major meeting, but try to focus better, is as we set up these goals, assigning them to a committee, so that it's part of their regular agenda and something that they're following through on better in a year than just waiting till the end of the year again and writing up your Word document.
Well, and that goes along with the strategic plan. So that's the other piece, was trying to tie in some of those major pieces of work to the committees. Many of those line up with this. So I think we struggled with kind of how to do all those reports over time. We've looked at the curriculum pieces that used to come in, and we moved those off to a special meeting. We had some of the strategic planning reports that were scheduled every month. And we started to move a few of those off to committees, and then we get the timer in. And as Mike said, we're not in a committee structure as frequently this year, so that's a good piece to get back.
As I was going back through the notes from our board retreat, that was one of the things a couple members brought up, was that the strategic reports being at the committees and the committee determining which reports need to get to the full board, right? So that it doesn't bog down quite as bad. And I still think Brian had the best idea, where each committee chair should be, well, someone should be defining and giving the definition for each committee. They've really done that very well over the community.
I also included in there the goals from a year ago, more than a year ago, from May 19. So what we had at that time was, one of them was obviously referendum planning, which is the facilities piece. The second part was connections with building and school staff, which I believe falls under the communication and engagement planning. Planning and budget connection, I think we did that to the budget priorities and moving that forward. Policy review, which we mentioned, and then compensation for staff. So I think what we're hitting are some of the continuations and expanding of some of the priorities we had just prior to COVID, so 1920 school year.
Did you see the piece of state is providing money for doing your logo and branding?
No,
The state came up with a thing, if you have a minority logo that should be changed, that there is a possibility of funding for that. Because I remember that was always a big piece of the, well, one issue brought up would be how expensive would it be to redo that? And there was something in the governor's budget about that.
what I can do, Mike, is I can take these major headings that we discussed, put a narrative to them, create one document that has our primary goals and it incorporates these budget priorities along with it, and then have that ready for the March board.
It's going to be the fastest committee meeting we've had.
Does that work for you, Brian?
Yes.
But now I'm intrigued by this idea that you have to pay the right thing. By the government, change logos.
Oh, I think it was in reaction to several people being resistant to doing it, and their arguments were the cost. And so I believe I saw it in the bullet points of his budget presentation. I'll try and go look it back up and give it to you if I find it.
I'll
Put it on the pile of oil.
Yeah.
Aspiration. Well, that's includes section 5 of the agenda. We have future meetings. You get a future meeting for goals committee ready?
I don't think at this point we can see how the board responds to the goals that we drafted. And then we can, probably the next piece of the goals committee, if this is still what is, if we're looking at any sort of special board meeting, particularly after we get after the election, and we can have another retreat this summer. Planning of that comes out of this.
Funny story before Dave put me on the goals committee. I was trying to get some back in April to get rid of it entirely.
It's evolved over time from being looking at all the departmental goals. That's probably when you remember it, Dave, when you talked about all the departmental goals around the horseshoe. And
Then it
then
became
different levels of report.
that was the group that would put together, the goals committee was the one that would put together the annual parent event, where we would pick one subject and invite the public to come in and do a presentation, and then they would have roundtables about it. Like 1 year was co-curriculars, 1 year
We did AODA,
the ODA was,
we did social emotional learning.
yeah. So each year there'd be an event like that, and the goals committee was the one that kind of ran it.
We were looking at different engagement activities. And the ones that we had some feedback from parents who wanted to have more dialogue.
We should probably do co-curricular every year and have really good attendance. But then that's what gave me the thought that that the goals committee should be the one that handles this whole communication plan concept and trying to engage the public on a regular basis instead of just a one-shot annual event that you do it for 2 hours and then you never hear about it again for 5 years.
And then also to do some more outreach with like municipalities. But of course, that was a year ago with this.
Yeah. That would be good.
I think we'll get back to that, because I think that's a needed too, just to kind of have some governmental relations between the different.
Got the planning commission meeting by
Got
half
the
an
goals
hour.
and all the time. used to do that a number of years ago, but it kind of went to the wayside. Probably time to bring that back.
All right. Ryan, you want to make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, sure. Since I'm so involved, a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
All right,
Aye.
Thanks, Brian.
I hope
Yep.
it's not well.
Thanks, ladies.